Bartlesville is definitely a better place to live because of Charlie and Corky Bowerman. They just get involved in everything, whether it's the high school or whether it's the church or whether it's the Bartlesville Community Foundation. Whatever it is, all these things that make Bartlesville better, Charlie and Corky have been in the forefront of most of those things.
They've made this town better by their remaining here and by their continued participation in so many events, programs, and causes that I can't even list them all. But you talk to anyone who knows about this community, and near the top of the list will be the names of Charlie and Corky Bowerman.
I think one of the more unique things about Corky and Charlie and all this is that I'm not sure any of us know what all they've really done in total for our community. They've been involved and a lot of us know little bits and pieces of what they've done, but they basically have given to our community because they believe in it, not because they want to be recognized for having done it.
They are a very down-to-earth couple. They grew up in humble beginnings, you know, small town in Indiana. They were, I like to say my husband and I are high school sweethearts. They were elementary school sweethearts. They have known each other since, I think, kindergarten. I mean, or before that even. They've known each other forever, which, you know, doesn't always work with people, but with this couple, it's perfect.
And one thing about Charlie and Corky, they're very friendly and always willing to help. Very easy to get to know and a lot of fun to be around.
Charlie and Corky Bowerman both grew up in Alamo, Indiana, and have known each other since grade school. Charlie's dad was a basketball coach, so Charlie's been playing ball his whole life.
Corky and I knew each other before we went to grade school, and we grew up in the same community. Our parents went to the same church, we went to the same church, and we just had a delightful time in the community that we grew up in.
When we were little, I thought he was just an ornery little boy. And then we started dating in high school. He played basketball and I was a cheerleader, and we started dating, and then on through college, and then we were married right after junior year in college.
Charlie went to Wabash College, which is a men's school. And he finally figured out how to, I guess, solve that problem because he married Corky, or married Coralea Weir, before he finished his final year in college. So he had his own wife with him while he was going his last year at a boys' school.
After receiving a liberal arts degree from Indiana's Wabash College, Charlie was recruited to play basketball for the Phillips 66ers. This new job brought the Bowermans to Bartlesville.
We moved to Bartlesville in 1961. Then toward the end of that year, we had our first child, Cindy, and she weighed 6 pounds, 6 ounces, and made the paper because everyone was laughing and teasing Charlie about showing his loyalty to Phillips 66.
Charlie went on to play with the 66ers for 3 years, and he was inducted into the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame in 1995.
Been a lot of good basketball players from the Hoosier State over the years, and I think probably it was the fact that the Phillips 66ers were in existence at that time that maybe attracted Charlie to Phillips, because it gave him an opportunity to continue playing basketball.
We played 70 or 80 games a year, and all of those were on the road, with the exception of maybe 8 or 10 games in Bartlesville. So while we were on the road, of course, we didn't work, but when we were in town, then everybody was assigned to a particular job, and it was just on-the-job training.
We had lots of basketball stories out in the driveway, and kids would stop by and say, "Hey, you want to play a game?" And, "Oh, we need another one." I said, "I'll get my dad. I'll be on his team." And so we'd go shoot around, and next thing you know, we'd be playing 2-on-2 or 3-on-3 with the guys, and we'd beat them all the time, so it was a lot of fun and funny because they didn't know what to think about that.
In 1964, Charlie started his marketing career with Phillips, and he and Corky had 2 more daughters, Christy and Candy. Charlie's job at Phillips meant the family moved around a lot in the first few years, but they finally settled in Bartlesville in 1980. Charlie's career lasted 38 years, culminating with his position as Executive Vice President of Planning, Corporate Relations, and Services.
Most kids would have a family meeting because they were getting ready to get in trouble. And at our house, it was if we were having a family meeting, it meant we were moving. And so we would all immediately burst into tears, my poor parents. But I think it gave us an opportunity to live a bunch of different places, to meet a lot of different people. And it really teaches you in the long run how to adapt. But I think it bonded us as a family because that's the only people that you know when you first move somewhere. And so we really learned to kind of rely on each other.
I think we decided it was like 17 moves in the first 25 years that we worked.
After his retirement in 1999, Charlie began using his leadership skills to give back to the community of Bartlesville.
I heard a speaker one time talk about the importance of being involved in the community, and he called it a civic rent that you should pay for the community that you lived in and participated in, and we've tried to do that.
After he retired, then in my mind, they kind of joined forces, and what a force that is.
I kind of like stories that start out in the beginning because that's where Charlie and Corky were. They really were the instigators of the Bartlesville Community Foundation.
Corky and I both felt very strongly about the Community Foundation, and it was one of the areas that we really applied our efforts to trying to give back to the community.
And very honestly, there would not be a Community Foundation as we know it today without Corky and Charlie Bowerman.
My mom and dad have been really involved in the community, and they've just given us a sense of love for the city. And even after me and my sisters have moved, all of us moved back to Oklahoma, when they've done things with the Bartlesville Community Foundation, they got us involved.
It was Charlie and Corky who took it to the next level. When it kind of broke away, you might say, from the chamber or was no longer a part of the Chamber of Commerce, it was Corky and Charlie who found a place where we could have an office. Corky decorated the office. You know, she begged and pleaded from ConocoPhillips and you know, other places, and the credit union, who was so generous to let us use their building for several years. With the Bartlesville Community Foundation would not be here today if it were not for those two, for sure.
In addition to all of that, don't forget that they were prime movers in the Methodist Church, and their big move to a new church out to the south.
They've been very active in the church, and especially since Charlie's retired, he has spent a lot of time helping behind the scenes in the church, not only raising money, but being involved in committees and projects.
We've been members of Bartlesville First Church since we moved back, and that we started back with them in 1980 when we came back for the third time. All of our girls have been baptized in that church and married there, and now we have grandchildren that have been baptized there. And Charlie and I have served on a lot of different committees with the church.
It was a very exciting time to build our new church, to see it come out of the ground.
Corky's been involved in many, many nonprofits herself, not the least of which at present is the Boys and Girls Club.
She has had a big influence in Bartlesville just from the boards that she's been on, and I think she's very multifaceted, and she has a lot of different personalities, and she can run a board meeting, and she can make decisions with the best of them. She's a businesswoman in that regards, but yet I've seen her with her children and her grandchildren, and she is definitely a mother and a great wife to Charlie.
She really goes into a job on a board with the idea that she's not just a figurehead, but she is going to work hard on that board with her gifts, her thoughts, her mind, and her heart.
You know, one of the best things about Charlie Bowerman is his ability to get people to do things. And I've said it several times, to be able to motivate people.
As a couple, they exceeded anything that could be accomplished by the sum of the parts. And they've just always worked together, and then, as Glenn said, just accomplished so many things for the betterment of our community.
You'd remember the year?
Yeah, we've been married 55 years, going on 56.
I think their legacy has just been that they've loved this town, and they've done a lot of things for a lot of people.
It's hard to list all the things that Charlie and Corky have been involved in. They've really been providers to the community with the spearheading the community foundation, spearheading the new baseball stadium, working not only with the church but the Boys and Girls Club, political activities if needed. They're really committed to the community.
I think their legacy isn't a specific thing that they did or will leave. I think it was their whole life and the example that they showed us and that they instilled in us in what was important in your faith and your family, and that's just what you do. You give back to the people that have given to you.
If there's ever a fulfillment of a term of a legacy in our community, it ought to revolve around George Halkyitis. I don't think there's a nonprofit in this city that hasn't been the beneficiary of the philanthropy of George Halkyitis.
George is a very likable individual. His manner is modest, it's disarming. He's got a tremendous sense of humor. He can trade jabs with the best of them, and yet there's never a mean streak in his body. He is one of these people who, at his heart, he's kind, he's gentle, he's thinking of the other guy, he knows how to express empathy.
I don't know how George does what he does. I mean, the list of his accomplishments and the organizations with which he's involved just go on and on. He's amazing. He's Mr. Bartlesville.
My dad was born in 1897 in Turkey, around the Dardanelles, and he came to America when he was about 20 years old, and he started work in the restaurant business. And after he'd been there a few years, he had a cousin, and she said, you know, it's time for you to consider getting married. And he said, well, but there are no Greek women around. And she said, well, I know somebody, I know a family back in Turkey that you might contact. And so he did, and he communicated via letters with my mother who was born in Istanbul, Turkey. And so they communicated for several years, and eventually my dad went to Greece, and mother came over, and they got married. That was the first time they met each other. And then they came back to Kingsport and bought a home and started a family.
Born January 15, 1942 in Kingsport, Tennessee, to Theophilus and Theodora Halkyitis, George was the youngest of 4 children. He always loved sports, but being a self-professed 80-pound scrawny run at the time, playing football was not for him. Instead, he took a job of equipment manager for his middle school football team, which became one of the greatest decisions of his life. The position led to a college scholarship as an equipment manager for the University of Louisiana Lafayette, where he got his degree in electrical engineering. In 1963, George took a job with Phillips Petroleum Company in research and development and moved to Bartlesville, Oklahoma. George was in Bartlesville for a couple years before meeting his wife, Jean, at a bowling tournament. They were married on September 21st of 1968. A couple years later, their son, Vince, was born. George had a long, successful career working for Applied Automation and its successor companies in various capacities. When he retired in 2003, he was the plant manager at Siemens. George was looking forward to spending his retirement with his wife, Jean, when she passed away in 2004.
She was a very loving person and humorous. I think that's one of the things that we hit it off real well, is we both had a kind of a wry sense of humor and enjoyed telling jokes. And even after she passed away, I could remember many times thinking, I'd hear a joke and I've got to tell Jean this joke, and then get home and then realize, no, she's no longer around. But we were married for 35 years, so we had a very good life together.
When he retired, he had that big void in his life from all those hours at work, and he immediately just turned it into working for local organizations. I mean, he'd get involved in something, and the next thing I'd know, he was an officer or running it.
After I retired, I went through leadership Bartlesville,